Hey everyone, I wanted you to just welcome me to week 3, and what I thought I would do was just to create a little video that talks about the next step of rhetoric and argument. Look, I've read all the discussion board questions and they are fabulous. You guys are doing a great job. It's rather funny because as of week 3, it looks like a lot of students want to use the term persuade as part of their definition of rhetoric. But as of week 3, I'm still going to maintain my definition of rhetoric. And as of week 3, my definition of rhetoric is still words that are used to manipulate, to deceive, and to con people. And so what I want to do in this short video is just talk about the next step of rhetoric and argument. Because rhetoric and argument use 3 things. And you might want to take some notes as you kind of just jot it down. Some of the ideas that I talk about here. Some of you may be familiar with these terms. Some of you may have never heard these terms before. But either which way, it doesn't really matter because I'm just going to introduce you to these 3 terms. So rhetoric and argument use 3 things. They use logos, pathos, and ethos. And so logos is the one that's most easy for students to kind of become familiar with, right? Even if they know nothing about rhetoric, even if they don't know anything about these three terms, most students, I can ask them, what do you think logos means? And most students will guess, hey, it means logic. And if you think about it, logos sounds like logic and it looks like logic. And it would make sense because if we want to accept class's definition of rhetoric, in which most students use the term persuade, right? If I want to persuade someone, I'm going to appeal to logic. If we want to argue that an argument uses facts, well, facts are usually based in logic. So the first thing that rhetoric and argument always use is logos, which is logic. The second thing is pathos. And pathos is an appeal to emotion. And if you think about it and you want to accept my definition of rhetoric, which I'm still going to maintain is words used to manipulate, deceive, and con people, well, if I wanted to manipulate someone, then I want to appeal to people's emotions. Because we're at the base level, we're all emotional beings, so why not try to appeal to some people's baseline emotions? So pathos is pathos. And the way that I sort of wanted to have students remember that the P stands for emotion, I always think of like passionate. Someone who's very passionate uses a lot of emotion, right? Or I think of, hey, here we are coming up to the Super Bowl. I think of the NFL, or I think of like, hey, the Pittsburgh Steelers have the most passionate fans. They're pretty sad these days. Or the Patriots didn't make it to the Super Bowl. But either which way, I just want to try some way to create a mnemonic so you can remember that the P stands for emotion. So we know that rhetoric and argument use logos, which is an appeal to logic, pathos, which is an appeal to emotion. The last one is ethos. And ethos can be kind of defined as 2 things. It can be defined as character or authority, and then it can also be defined as ethics. And I like how someone in one of the discussion boards this week pointed out that, my definition of rhetoric raises some ethical issues, right? Is it ethical to use rhetoric to manipulate someone? In our class, I won't define ethics as a moral and ethics because later in class, if we get to stasis theory has its own component that deals with moral and ethics. So I will start out defining ethos as an appeal to character and authority. And I think that's the one that sometimes kind of confuses people. What do we mean by character or authority? But if you think about how I use someone's character or authority to define my definition of rhetoric, I always say, who was really good at using rhetoric? Hitler was good at using rhetoric, right? He convinced a nation to go to war. He convinced the German people to create a Holocaust. So whenever I'm trying to defend my definition of ethos, I kind of use the ethos of Hitler. What was genius is that in some people's discussion board, they use the ethos of, say, Martin Luther King, or Obama or George Washington, and use their ethos as a way to defend that their definition of rhetoric as either the ability to persuade or to be a little more positive. So all I want you to do is to think about now how rhetoric uses these three things. Because we now know that rhetoric and argument use three things. It uses logos, which is an appeal to logic, pathos, which is an appeal to emotion, remembering that P stands for passion, and E is the ethos, which stands for character or authority. There's a discussion board question that will have you kind of talk about, where you, as a class, you guys can talk about these terms. Which one do you think is the